Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Now let us discuss about the causes of acid rain. Acid rain is caused through two major ways. One is natural and other is human induced or anthropogenic. When you just look onto the natural sources, very particularly from the volcanoes and biological processes, biological decay, oxides of sulfur, carbon and nitrogen are released. In addition to that, whatever the acidic deposits in the glacial ice, that melts away and also add to the acid rain. Next thing, coming to the human sources. Obviously, the industrial and the transport arena are the two major disciplines, or rather I can say two major anthropogenic sources. Industrial factories, power generating plants and vehicles contribute for the acid rain. Very particularly oxides of sulfur, nitrogen, which are released during the fuel burning processes. Very particularly because of the incomplete combustion, acid rain is formed. So this is a point to be noted. Now if you just look on the anthropogenic and the natural thing, VOC, volatile organic carbons, oxides of sulfur and nitrogen, NOx, oxides of nitrogen, mercury, all these things are released as a gaseous pollutants from the industry and also from the natural factors or the natural sources. They go mingle with the atmosphere water vapor. They can just settle down as gaseous pollutants, which we call it as a dry deposition, or these particulates mixes along with the pollutants in the cold water and precipitates down, that we call it as a wet deposition. Acid rain can happen as a dry or a wet deposition. Now, if you just look onto the formation of acid rain, the water vapor condenses, dissolves with water, and oxides of sulfur reacts to form H2SO4, that is sulfuric acid, and as well as HNO3, nitric acid. So they precipitate, the water is now acidic and forms as an acid rain and falls on the surface of the earth. When you just look onto the effects of acid rain, first thing, it creates lot of economic damage. The pictures are very clear. It causes deterioration to the buildings. Particularly calcium and magnesium sulfate are formed. Because it's an acid, it precipitates to form the salt. It damages the statues. Very invaluable precious statues at Greece and Italy are deteriorated by this acid rain. It damages the metals, very particularly it causes corrosion and car finishes. So as a result, the economic value or the economic weightage of a particular property gets decreased. Another thing is, it also makes the trees, because of the acid rain, the trees or the leaves become pale or thin yellow. It might induce chlorosis. And this also results in the stress to the plant, and the plant becomes more vulnerable to trouble or more vulnerable to death during heavy temperature or cold temperature or during the drought. Another thing is, when acid rain falls on a lake, the pH of the lake water also gets changed. As a result, the lake becomes acidified. When the lake becomes acidified, the fishes in the lake dies. Very particularly, it allows the toxicity of metals, release of metals. So aquatic animals suffer from toxicity of metals, particularly aluminium, mercury, manganese, zinc and lead. Further, it results in reproductive failure, particularly in the killing of the fish. And it is well explained with the lakes which are present in Sweden, Norway and Canada, where you don't find fishes at all. Another thing is, it damages the foliage, very particularly the sprouting green leaves, and weakens the trees. And the trees are also susceptible to stresses like cold temperature and drought, other thing. So these are some of the effects of acid rain. Now coming to the ozone layer depletion. Ozone is a layer found in the stratospheric region. Ozone is a stable molecule composed of three oxygen atoms. It is a bluish gas located in the stratosphere. It can absorb the ultraviolet radiation and protects the earth. If ultraviolet radiations fall on the Earth's surface, it can induce cancer in the living organisms. So that is again a point to be noted. So ozone layer is gradually getting depleted. Now, if the concentration of the ozone is decreasing and if the layer is getting thinning, it is called as ozone depletion. Particularly in the Arctic region, the ozone concentration is decreasing. So that is the reason they call it as ozone hole. So the stratospheric ozone in the Earth's polar region during the springtime decreases. So they popularly call it as ozone hole. So the total amount of ozone in the Earth's atmosphere is gradually getting deteriorated. That we call it as ozone layer depletion. Well, if you just look on the sun, the oxygen molecules are photolyzed, so it forms two individual oxygen atoms that we call it as nascent oxygen atoms. These nascent oxygen atoms are unstable. They join with the O2 and form ozone. They form fast. Here, the chain is broken because of the chlorine atoms. So the ozone is lost in the third step. The ozone is lost by the reaction of the oxygen atom or by the ozone molecule itself. Very particularly when chlorine atoms come, it dissociates further and doesn't allow the single oxygen to combine with the two oxygen atoms to form ozone. So the interconversion process is being hampered by the chlorine atoms, very particularly they are called as the ozone depleting substances, very particularly the halogenated compounds. Now, well, let us look on to the various ozone depleting chemicals. So a variety of chemicals, very particularly halogenated compounds, chlorofluorocarbons, methyl bromide, cleaning agents, sprays, pesticides, fire extinguishing chemicals, fire retardants contain halogenated compounds which have got the potentiality to deplete the ozone. Now, when you just look onto the effect of the ozone layer depletion, first thing it causes skin cancer. Ozone layer actually acts as a protective shield against the harmful ultraviolet radiations emanated from the sun. So it acts as an umbrella like a shield or protecting or filtering. If this ozone layer is depleted, the ultraviolet radiations have the capability to induce cancer, particularly skin cancer. Melanoma and non-melanoma are the two types of skin cancer found or prevalent because of the ozone layer depletion. And a 10% depletion of the ozone layer can increase the cancer rate to 30%. And it also results in the premature aging of the skin, cataracts, immune system suppression, a more amount of acid deposition, photochemical smog, and finally it may also lead into decreased or reduced yield of the crops. So it has got a plethora of effects right from skin cancer to the less yield of crops. Now this ozone layer depletion can be prevented and it is largely dealt with the Montreal Protocol, which is a treaty for the protection of the ozone layer and banning the use of the chlorofluorocarbons. It is signed in the year 1987 and India is also one of the signatory country. In fact, we will discuss this Montreal Protocol in the environmental laws and the protective legislations available. So the take home message is our own activities create enormous amount of change. Till now we have seen what is a climate change, what is global warming, how ozone layer is depleted, how it can relate into a acid rain, how it can impact the human communities and agriculture. By and large, if you look on, natural resources are there and anthropogenic activities are accelerating the whole thing. And if you just look on, carbon dioxide is found to be one of the major greenhouse gas responsible for a global warming, in turn responsible for a climate change. The ozone layer depletion is happening because of the various halogenated compounds which are still in use. Acid rain occurs because of the anthropogenic contaminants, particularly oxides of sulfur, nitrogen and carbon, which are released from the industries as well as from the transportation sector, where we observe an incomplete combustion of the fuel happens. The effect is manifested from a small trivial change in the prematuring age of the skin, ultimately to cancer and death. So it changes the pH and it exerts an impact on each and every biotic component. Let it be a fish, let it be a plant or a crop, or it could be a human. And all the factors which are predisposing, we just blame on the deforestation and very many activities such as urbanization and other things. And it has got an impact to trigger the natural disasters, particularly cyclones and floods. We have observed that icebergs are melting, glaciers are declining down, increase in the sea level. So these are some of the factors, and the coastal areas are expected to inundated. Overall, if you just look on, there is an increase in the temperature by 0.1 degree centigrade, and over the last decade, the temperature levels are also being increased, and primarily through the industrial greenhouse gas emissions. So the take home message is how best we can be aware of all these issues and be more responsible citizen to create an eco-friendly environment. The best tip is plant a tree. So that might help to reduce to an extent at least 0.1% of the carbon dioxide gases present in the atmosphere. Thank you. Good morning everybody. I am Jay Kumar, Assistant Professor in Environmental Science at Geetham University, Bengaluru campus. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. B.S. Balaji and DTH Swayamprabha MHRD for permitting me to deliver this lecture. In today's lecture, we are going to discuss about the different types of environmental legislation and the policies available in India. We are going to discuss about the Environmental Protection Act, Air and Water Act, which deals more with prevention and control of pollution, Wildlife Protection, Forest Conservation Act, and what are the Montreal and Kyoto protocols and the Convention on Biological Diversity are available to enhance the process of preventing the pollution and banning the ozone depleting chemicals. We will be seeing it in detail. Now, what is this Environmental Protection Act? It has been passed in the year 1986. It came into amendment in the year 1987, and this act was passed at the Parliament of India in wake of the Bhopal gas tragedy, where methyl isocyanate gas release happened and it killed minimum of 1500 people, and it was being passed under the Article 253 of the Constitution. It is passed in the March 1986 and came into force in the 19th November 1986. This Environmental Protection Act is a legal act to protect the environment. It has got 26 sections and 4 chapters. The very purpose of this Environmental Protection Act is to implement the decisions on the United Nations Conference of the Human Environment, where how best we can save the environment, what are the current issues of the environment, how we can combat the environmental issues on a legal perspective. That was the main idea. The main objective is protection and improvement of the human environment and preventing the hazards not only to human beings but all the biotic components, every living creature in the environment as well as to the property. This is actually a legal framework given by the central government to enact, and it Under this Environmental Protection Act, you could find various other acts, very particularly Water and Air Act is being coordinated through the central and the state government authorities, particularly through the pollution control boards. As I told you, this Environmental Protection Act consists of 4 chapters and 26 sections. The chapter 1 gives about the preliminary information such as title, what is the extension, what is the meaning. For example, environment. Environment means the surrounding. Surrounding includes every component, both biotic as well as abiotic component. So when it got commenced, what are the definitions for each and every term? So the definitions are given in the second section of the Act. The chapter 2 describes about the general powers of the central government. Can it constitute a pollution control board? Whether the pollution control board can give a directive to the industry. This is the way the water has to be released. It has to be treated prior released into the environment. These technological developments could be infused. So these technologies are found to be sound and you can implement it. So all these things have been described in the chapter 2. Coming to the chapter 3, it gives the central government the power to take action or protect the environment. It can declare any area as a wildlife sanctuary or a natural reserve, and it can stop an industry if it is letting pollution. The chapter 4 allows the government to appoint officers, that is the state authorities or the central authorities, to achieve these objectives of protecting the environment. So the power is given to direct to the closure, prohibiting or regulating the industry, and if it is a polluting or other thing, they can even lead to a closure of industry, apply some penalties, or make a complete lockdown of the industry. All these things are given in the chapter 4. Now, it also provides the provisions for penalties for the contravention of the provisions, how it can be achieved, how the order can be put forth. So, for example, today the government has given a directive. The plastic or the polythene cover bags that is found in the market, the size, the thickness should not be less than 20 or 25 microns. So it should be above 25 microns. So that is the legislation being given. And if any offense is being done by a company or a department or other thing, that has to be prepared and it has to be detailed out. And it says for such offense, the in charge of the head of the department, very particularly for an industry, will be subjected to some punishment. Who is the owner of the institution? He will be subjected to punishment. Now, under this Environmental Protection Act, it is a broad umbrella under which you find the Air Pollution and Prevention and Control Act. The government passed this act in the year 1981 to clean the air by controlling air pollution. In fact, this came in a wake or it is in parallel with the Bhopal gas tragedy. It particularly monitors the compounds such as particulate matter. They call that as suspended particulate matter. It should not be less than 2 or 3 microns, which can even lead to lung cancer. Lead. Lead is a metal which can lead to some sort of nephrological or neurological complications in humans. Carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, volatile organic compounds. These components are being released in industrial processes, very particularly from the power generating industry or coal-fired thermal power plants, or it emanates from the usage of vehicles or any other toxic substances beyond a prescribed level. So they give the list of prescriptions. This is the threshold level. Beyond this level, if it is found, it can be penalized. So that is what this Air Pollution Prevention and Control Act speaks. When you just look onto the Air Pollution Prevention and Control Act, to ensure this act, pollution control boards are being set up by the government. to measure the pollution levels in the atmosphere. Very particularly, you can find every vehicle, two-wheeler or four-wheeler, should have a pollution certificate saying that the pollution is under control. The pollution control stations are located, you can find near the petrol pumps. They just use a probe to insert into the exhaust pipe of the vehicle, check the levels of carbon, hydrocarbons, oxides of carbon, sulfur and other thing, and they give the threshold levels. If the threshold levels is more, for example in the case of lead, it should be 0.001 ppm. If it exceeds, then the vehicle can be seized because high amount of lead might be released. If the hydrocarbons are more, if it is more than 30 to 40%, yes, it is leading to pollution. The vehicle requires a complete checkup and a thorough change of the oil or engine maintenance or whatever it might be. So the Air Pollution Prevention and Control Act clearly indicates that these toxic substances, particularly particulate matter, lead, oxides of sulfur, nitrogen and other gases, has to be monitored. The main objective of the act is, first thing is to provide prevention, control and abatement of air pollution. How best it can be prevented at the source. So in the case of sulfur, desulfurization of coal, control measures, can we go for the treatment with an electrostatic precipitator in industry which is letting the gaseous pollutants. Second objective is to, it can establish state and central pollution control boards with the authorities to implement the act. The boards are conferred with powers to implement the provisions of the act and assign responsibilities and provide members, appointing members for the board for the effective implementation of the act. So the same thing is applicable for both air and water. When you just look on to the power and functions of the board, very particularly the central board is created to implement the legislation to improve the quality of the air, prevent and control it, and it can give directive or technology or the technical manual to the state pollution control boards to implement it. It can train the people, coordinate them, provide them technical assistance, lay down the standard, collect and disseminate information to the public as well as to the government. Very particularly, the state pollution control boards comes under the state government, gets the directive from the central government. It also works by and large to implement to control the air or water pollution. It has got all the right to inspect at any point of time to an industry, collect the sample, analyze the sample and find that whether the contaminants present in the sample are within the threshold limit or they are increasing. So that is being carried out by the state pollution control boards. Another thing is they can expected to inspect anything, let it be an air polluting area, or they can enter and collect gas from the chimney or the stack, or they can collect the wastewater effluent discharge from the industry. They will be listing out the standards for the emissions of the gases and the let of the pollutants through the water for different industrial sectors, and they can analyze the composition of the air that is being let out through the chimney. All these things could be made. In fact, they will also recognize a laboratory or they have got their own state pollution control laboratory. They will continuously monitor it and implement towards the abatement of air or water pollution. Now, the state pollution control boards have been given some powers. So, after consulting with the state board, the state government can take an action over an industry or it can revise and ensure the standards, especially for the emission of air pollutants from the two-wheelers or from the industries, or even they can close certain industrial activities or an industrial plants provided if they found to violate the laws and the standards given by the pollution control boards. Coming to the penalties, if they just look on anything, if the levels are being violated or their gaseous effluent or the water effluent contains high level, they can be penalized. And also make applications to the court for restraining the persons causing air pollution. So penalties, you can see if they don't have a proper pollution control certificate. If the emission rates are very high, they can impose penalty to the two-wheeler or the four-wheeler. So whatever it might be, they can even extend an imprisonment and with a fine of 10,000 or both. So this is I'm just giving the minimum fine I'm saying. Depending on the situation or the thing, they can even close the industry. In a same tone, we can understand the Water Pollution Act. So it is an act to prevent and control the water pollution. You have to maintain and restore the wholesomeness of water. Wholesomeness of water means the water should be potable. To carry both the acts, prevention control and wholesome of water, they establish pollution control boards at state and central level. And they have been conferred with powers where the central and the state pollution control boards act in coordination, support the state and central government to take decisions to implement the standards or to lay down the standards. In fact, all the powers are applicable as same as the case of air pollution to the Water Pollution Act to the same state as well as the Central Pollution Control Board. So the Central Pollution Control Board can formulate or lay down the standards or guidelines for the emission or for the wastewater. They can give the values, give a training over the technology to analyze it, how they can collect the sample. They have been empowered to collect the sample at any point of time, make an analysis in the laboratory, give a report, and they can direct issues over the change of the treatment technologies for the industries, or if it is beyond the limit prescribed statutory limit, they can even fine, they can penalize it, or they can even close the industry. Further, they also collect and disseminate the information, provide information to the state and the central government to take appropriate action to prevent and control the air or water pollution.